Okay, welcome to today's webinar, Mailing Lists Still Work, 10 Ways to Get the Most from Your List. My name is Greg Chambers. In today's agenda, we're going to cover 10 ways that you can get more from lists. And I really divided it into three main groups. There's going to be a couple of points around list types and how we think of those lists, profiling, how to using those lists and doing profiling, and then appending information being the third group. A few stories in there about that, and then we'll do a wrap up. And in the beginning, there is a text. Oh, it looks like Nui jumped in there. Thanks for joining our webinar. So if you have a question, go ahead and go into the chat box. Nui will help me monitor those. And then there's also a Q&A. If you see that icon in your Zoom control panel, that Q&A is you can ask questions as we go along. We'll stop and pause as we go through it, but we're just going to jump right in. These are the 10 ways, because I'm going to keep you for a half hour, maybe a little longer, maybe shorter if there's no questions. So 10 ways. Here's five. The first 5 ways. We're going to talk about compile it, raise your hand, the big show, Freshness Matters. Wait, you too? Then we'll get into the robots, lookalikes, the inside list, hold me back, and what you make it. And so with that in mind, let's can get finding a list what it's really best at. And I guess the keyword there is comprehensiveness. The second type of lists is that we deal with a lot, and that the way that we would use it is our response list. So when I say raise your hand, if you think about all the information that we're trading when we do transactions, right? There was just MasterCard and Google announced a little bit of a partnership between, so that they could track offline purchases and maybe try to hook those back into what people were searching for online before they did this offline stuff. Any information where if you've subscribed to any, or if a farmer has subscribed to any a publication, in those publications, there's generally going to be a big questionnaire, right? So I may get the farm equipment magazine for free, and in return, what I do is I fill out all this information. So the big difference between this and the compiled list is that these lists tend to be, responsive lists tend to be a lot more, they have deeper information on different contexts. So the extra info on these accounts help give us hints for who we should be targeting first, right? So if we think of a compiled list as a 5,000-foot view of an area, the responders list is more like 1,000 feet. And you know this, right? So like a compiled list, it'll save you time, but the challenge is that we don't always have full information on the entire area. We just have deep information on a bunch of accounts. So in particular, if we were working with an accountant and he targeted accountants, right? So that's not in the ag industry, but in targeting accountants, there's a couple ways to go, right? One is to find all the CPA firms, and depending on what you're selling, maybe that's what you need to do. But the second way is getting a response list like this, like I think it's called Accounting Today, one of these source media files. And looking inside of that source media file, we can find more. Usually what it is that if a firm has 30 partners, say, there's a good chance that 20 of those 30 partners are subscribed. So I have in-depth contact information in that particular case, but I don't necessarily have every single accounting firm, because there's dozens of accounting firms and not all of them are going to get every single one of these magazines. So where do we use this file? We use this file when we need deeper information on an existing market and a market that we're going into. So the way to get more from a compiled, if you want more in-depth information, look for response lists. Just know that the universe is going to be smaller when you pull them. How about this one? The big show, we call this. So this is our other favorite group of lists, and it is trade show lists, right? Trade shows, if you're at the trade shows, generally you're going to get the lists in there. And then along with that are associations. So if we look at the three big groups of lists, one is compiled. We're just trying to find information on everybody, make it as comprehensive as possible. A response file, we're trying to get more information from individual accounts, and we really don't care as much about comprehensiveness. We would love it for it to be comprehensive, but we really want in-depth information. What's your title? How many people work there? Or deeper, something deeper than what you can find inside of the compiled list. And in these cases, these affinity lists, since we're all paying to be part of this universe, what we're really paying for is a chance to grow, to use the name to help ourselves with introductions. So if you're in direct sales, associations, as you know, are a great way to look at this, but it's not the same as compiled lists, right? So for an example, when I was in the apparel business, if you listen to a few of these, I keep using this apparel example, but it's relevant to me. But in the apparel industry, I was selling to retailers, and the retailers, I ended up joining a group of retailers. And in return for joining that group, I had to give them a percentage of sales generated. The advantage for me was that in return for that percentage of sales, every time I called and said, I'm with the Northwest Buyers Group, everybody took my call because they had a vested interest. I found out later they had a very vested interest because they got a kickback for every merchant that they bought from that was inside of their group. So they were really encouraged to purchase inside of their group. So it's nowhere near as comprehensive as a full list. When I was selling to these apparel companies, there was maybe one or two per state, even though I knew that there were, dozens, but it was a way to get out and get things going. So in that case, generating immediate sales, I started with trade show lists and then moved up to more comprehensive lists like compiled lists, which tend to be a lot cheaper. If you go down in cost in these 1, 2, 3, basically go from least expensive per record down to you're getting a little bit more expensive because generally you got to join this group and then maybe even do something like volunteer your time. So that's 3, 1, 2, 3. The 3 big lists when we approach any sort of marketing or sales activity. I'm looking at the list and I'm trying to think, okay, how is this list compiled? How is this list put together? And what's the best way for us to use it? Now let's get into some other pieces. I'm going to call this one Freshness Matters. And when you're looking at databases, one of my insider secrets, one of my insider tricks is that you need to look at all the fields that are available. And the reason is because in these fields, there may be indicators of something you could use. A lot of people will use them because they say, oh, I only target, I only want farms that have a certain amount of acreage of this particular crop, or else I'm not going to call them. Okay, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the broad indicators may show an underlying truth where you can discern some information from that. So let's take a look at this, right? U.S. farm data. If you ask us, right, we can add a select for real estate transfers in the last 12 to 24 months. Now, often this is asked for by people who are looking that are in the real estate business and have indicators from that. But as another indicator, what it really is it's an indicator of economic activity, right? If we use the old adage, you're either going forward or moving backwards, right? You can't stay the same. This would be an indicator if we took the big list. Here's a compiled list of 1,000 records. Which ones are the ones that had active real estate transfers in the last 12 to 24 months? That might knock it down to 200 or even fewer, but at least those, compared to all the rest of the records, we have an indicator of where it works. On a previous list, here's an example for you. That's actually not in the US Farm Data database, but in our business database, most of those records were compiled out of the old Yellow Pages, right? That's where you could find a list, the most comprehensive public list of businesses. But in there, there was this Yellow Page ad size, and I could never figure out why it was that anybody would look at Yellow Page ad size. And then asking this guy who was doing, he was actually early on selling online marketing services. He said, oh, all I do is I select by ad size, because if they're taking out a full page or a half page ad, all it tells me is that they're spending a bunch of money on marketing. So if I'm helping, if I want to help them with their websites and with marketing, it's a good indicator for me if they have more than just the line item entry. And that's what I'm talking about. So looking at the database rate card, and if you haven't seen a rate card, for most, especially responsive lists, you can get a rate card and it will give you a bunch of indicators that you can select. There, usually you have to pay a little bit more for those selects, but the reason you do it is because, again, we're trying to shortcut time, and this is a good way to shortcut time. So Freshness Matters, recent real estate transactions. This one was what, 1902? So Ellen Shattuck to Fred. I wonder where that is. Take a look at the rate card and think about your business sales cycle and what that would indicate inside of. If you knew that information, what could you also discern from the rest of the record? All right, here's hint number 5. Companies that sell to the same market you do. This is, so I was reading the story about I check out the venture funded companies list just because I'm curious as to where the big dollars are flowing and where the market's going. And this one was listed as the 23andMe for cows. So if I were this company, so the idea behind this is that outside of the list companies that are selling lists, there are companies you can partner with that may have lists that you can piggyback on, and maybe you could do some sort of joint marketing effort with them. And we've found these to be successful over time. So if you're not competing directly, right, that tends to be the thing, is you can't be a direct competitor, or else why would anybody share with you? And then you need to have something to offer them in return. In this company's case, they're the 23andMe for cows. And the first thing I thought of was, what is one thing that all dairy cattle farmers have in common? And it's the feed fences, right? So a potential partnership in there would be, this would just be an example of it, where this young company that has all this venture funding, that maybe the cattle fence companies, the feed fence companies, don't have the advantage of these new market funding opportunities. Maybe there's a value exchange that can happen in there. But for the 23andMe, if they're trying to cut through the noise and they want to get a little deeper information and they want to talk to some people who know all about their market, it could be that the feed fencing people are the people to talk to. So sample idea, and this is when I was talking to, I have a son who sells, he just got his first job out of college, and so he's actively out marketing. And as he's building his list, he uses a lot of LinkedIn and these things, but they sell this online software that it's not online, but it's for call centers, but it requires a soft phone. So if I had a landline phone, or if I have one of the old PBX boxes, he can't sell to them. So the first thing I thought is, gosh, if I were you guys, I would go try to find the people who sell soft phones. That would be a good place to partner. So that's a way to use lists, but they're lists that aren't necessarily public lists. They're lists that are contained inside of other companies. And the good news is that it's always good to network with people who are working inside your same market, even though, yeah, I understand you're competing for the same dollars in some way, shape, or form. If you're trying to add value to your customers, it seems like that's worthwhile. So that's way number 5. Way number 6, the robots. The more and more time we spend online, the more our digital footprint, all of our digital footprints are growing. And that includes farmers and ranchers, anybody marketing to them or marketing inside that market. So even though they may not be on Facebook for business, Facebook is picking up all the information about them. Even though they may not, it may be hard to find them to target on Google, there is a way. Google is collecting all this information because almost everybody uses Google or some form of Google property. And LinkedIn anymore, even though it's debatable as to whether your target market is really active on LinkedIn. They may be there as well. And then you just have to know that with the Microsoft network, some of that information gets shared across network. So what you can do, knowing these online marketplaces are huge, is your customers are hanging around in there, and you can upload them into each of these networks. That will create audiences. Facebook calls them audiences. I forget what Google calls it something else, and then it looks like LinkedIn calls it matched audiences. So, but once you have that picture in there, the robots, the artificial intelligence people will go find, right? They will start looking for lookalikes, people that you can target that look like the audience that you've uploaded. So if you're prospecting, spend a little bit of money. The way you do it, spend a little money and get your internal lists into the big groups, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, and then let the robots do a little work with some automation. The only caveat I have to add to this is that in the middle there where it says Google's, it's Google's display ad automation. The bottom one there is aggressive automation. I would highly recommend against that because your budget will disappear immediately. So here's a way that we use this with a client, and actually it was really directed more from the client than it was from us, but we helped him put it together. He put together a press release distribution list on these networks. So he was writing articles. He'd always been writing articles about a particular event in the Gulf, around the Gulf area, Gulf of Mexico. And every article he wrote was around that particular event. And so by putting in audiences and then telling those networks to look for audiences that look like his in these particular areas, we were able to increase the exposure. The nice thing is it was cheaper than the press release service than he was using, just by buying ads for these networks and getting them out there. And then his anecdotal, it is anecdotal, information that the ideas we're getting in front of the right people is that the judges who were working on the litigation started using some of his phraseology inside of their opinions as they were coming out. So he knew that his message was getting through a form of gentle persuasion, didn't cost a lot of money, but it was a way that he used this, these networks. He told them, this is the kind of people that I'm looking for, and then find people who are like them, and they were able to find others inside there. Yeah, you don't get the benefit of having their name, their address, and all the direct information. But at the same time, if you're playing in the same fields that they're playing in, that's a way to take advantage of the giant lists that are out there on in those network groups. Okay, now we're going to go from doing customer profile type work, because that's really what those data profiling, those last three examples were in the data profiling world. This is adding information to your existing database. I just knocked my thing down. And what we do here is just what it says here. We take, find each of these databases that you're looking for, you can get database up, you can have the data that they've collected appended. Where that is, the reason you want to do that is because, well, first of all, the first reason I'd want to do it is because if I want to get into these networks, they match on email. And so the more emails I can add to my database that are attached to my customer records, the better chance I have of finding matches and finding them on those networks. So the way it works is pretty simple. Usually you bump the file into your file, and then where the matches come, you ask for the fields that you're looking for to be appended. And that can range everywhere from, if you're trying to build a big marketing database, you can attach all of your information to it. If you're just looking for an email field, you can just pay for the email field. Just a word of warning, you do pay more per record, because generally once it gets on your database, there's no licensing, right? It's hard to license that year after year, because you could say, oh, we took it off. And not that you would do that, but let's just say some people might do something like that. So bump the file against it, and yeah, and so add that in. I don't really have any stories that go along with this, other than as people have been trying to use these networks, this has been the recommendation. We've been appending email addresses where we have them, and then helping them grow that list just so that they can be more effective. Okay, so that's way number 7. Way number 8, let's get into your internal databases. The inside list, your inside list is always going to be the best looking thing. So your internal files are, we say they're ripe for growth. They're ripe, they're ripe for growth. And but we spend very little time analyzing the inside of our database from a database marketing perspective. So an easy way to do that is to break your customer base into A, B, C, D customers by some metric, right? Either it's revenue spent in the last year. You could put time on that. You could put types of products, because maybe some customers invest in higher profit products than others. So once you've got that broken down, then you want to look between the sheets. So who in your database shares the lookalikes of your best customers? So if on the left, if the orange and the guy with the little white hat are your best customers, who else in the database looks like that? And generally you can find them. For example, working with a firm that has around 3,000 customers. And so they had pulled out the top 10% and they're like, this is our best customer list. Because it really was. It's half of their revenue comes from that top 300. And then they were really focused on how do we do more with that 300. And we pointed out that there's 2,700 other companies in their database that they do work with, but how many of them look like the top 300? The whole goal of that exercise is not necessarily that it gave them a path. There's a lot of reasons as to why those people did not look like the top 300. And then there's usually inside the top 300, there's a couple reasons why they uniquely invested so much money in the company's products and services. But what it does is it broadens the conversation internally. And that's probably one of the more important things that adding marketing information can do to your database. The more you turn your customer files into a marketing type file where you can ask questions about why is this like this and why is this like that, that's where new opportunities come from inside of those lists. So consider that. And then number 9, we're going to get into number 9 here. So we're still talking about data append stories. This one is really holding me back as a data suppression story. You can, if you've not bought lists before, here's a hint, you can do data suppression. So you have a database that you've already been working for, you can bump the list against their list and they will suppress and only give you the new records. Most people do that just A, to save, it saves a little bit of money because you don't need to buy all the records, but B is it, it lessens the effort. There's not duplication in the database, or it reduces the amount of duplication. It's hard to eliminate it, but it reduces it. So if you're doing this, what you've also created is that suppressed file is your matched file. And so my advice is invest a little more and append the information onto the file. Find fields that you want to append onto the file that you already have in-house. And then you can use it for something like this. So US Farm Data, we're always looking to grow our company. And so we're an inbound. Most of you found us because you found us online, and that's how we drive. The vast majority of our business comes from people coming to us. We don't have a strong outbound effort. So when we did suppression, the reason we did suppression is because we were just trying to identify, when you took a look at all of the customers, the people who are investing with us, who is a lookalike in our general database, because we have a big business database. And it's can be depressing to see that, because you start to say, oh my gosh, our market penetration is small. But no, just knowing that helps us make a plan. So as we were looking to grow US Farm Data, one of the things that we came up with is, in addition to doing some different marketing activity that still fits in with our inbound first approach, there's some pieces of work that we were starting to do with customers that we wanted to do more of. And that's actually where, as we put these things together, the lead gen compass that we keep talking about, a new product and service that's going to be launching. This is where that comes from. So again, so it's more information. It helped us have better discussions internally where we could decide what to do. So if you haven't been suppressing your files, make sure you do that, because at the very least, it saves you a little bit of money. But B, see if you can get information, see if they'll sell you the matches and which parts of the matches that they'll sell on there. And if you need any help with any of this stuff, our data experts are there to help you. So let's get into number 10. Number 10 sits by itself, which is just this constant question we have, and we're trying to help people with, which is how do you cost justify the expense of lists? And really, lists by themselves are only worth so much. So like a compiled list, it's broad information. If you're if you've been using your compiled list and you just keep renewing that list, the real value from the list comes from the internal database. This is supposed to be a snapshot of Salesforce, but it looks like it's Salesforce, an add-on inside of Outlook.com. So Salesforce being a customer relationship management software, all the information that gets added, all the emails that goes on to James Jones, his record, the example there, that's where the value of your lists come from. So to cost justify the cost of lists and the effort that goes into lists, broaden your time frame as to where the results are going to come from. So how do you do that? Well, start at the end and then work your way back in. So for instance, again, going back to this lead gen compass that we're launching, we know, so it came about because we did a lot of research testing. We had some initial beta testers that we ran the service with. We profiled them, and then we found information that started to jump out, like, oh, the presence of analytics. Do they have salespeople? How big is the sales force? How active are they on social media, etc. But we're appending that information and more. And the reason is because we know that in a couple of years, the business, we're going to be more interested in scoring leads as they come in. Right now, the score everybody gets is, are you interested? Yes or no, right? It's like it's a 1 or a 0. But in the future, that scale could be a scale of 1 to 1,000, depending on all the information that we've gathered from working with people as we go along. The only way that helps is today is if we kind of plan for collecting as much information as we can, using our databases and the work that we do on databases to deepen the file so that when we do the analysis in the future, we have more things to score with and to figure out if there's any trends that show up, like those little things with the yellow page ad size that I was mentioning, or the real estate transfers. So that would be a way to do it, because your inside information is always going to be the best information that you have. And the more you can do to enhance that information, the better chance you have to learn from it down the road, even if you can't do it today. So the way to cost justify that is we broaden the time frame and we start thinking about all the things we can do in the future. And that's why we take the effort to do it today, because as it so happens, it does get expensive to do a lot of appending on the back end when it's information you probably could have collected on the front end with a little bit of effort, maybe an Upwork contractor or summer interns. This could work for them. So let's summarize. These are the top 10 reasons we talked about. The big three, right? Compiled databases, how to get the most from those. Response databases, how to get the most from those. And then how to use affinity databases to help you. And and if you're looking at it, you're thinking, I could probably bump all three of those together. You can. And again, if you need help with that, we do that kind of work. The second three, profiling information. Look for indicators, right? That Freshness Matters, the recent real estate transactions. Partner with other organizations that are targeting the same group and see if there's lists that you can share, or maybe lists that you can work together. And then put these robots to work for you that are out in the world that are maybe going to find trends or people deep inside of companies that you normally wouldn't get in front of. They give you an opportunity to get in front of them. Appending information, the way to get the robots to work is to append emails so that you can get a bigger pool for them to choose from. Add to your inside list, and then use data suppression. Don't be afraid to ask for it. Every company is ready to do it that works with data. And in the end, to cost justify your results over time, it's the easiest way to describe what's going to be happening to the C-suite, but it really is to the C-suite. Everybody loves to see a positive return on investment. And so by talking about leading indicators, this is what we expect to have happen. And then this is in the end, how we'll know it's happening over time. And then we'll be pre-prepared to do more with our internal lists if we approach it this way. We say to the CFO, that generally it excites them. They just want, right? Everybody just wants to know, can I measure it? Because if I can measure it, then I have a chance to understand it. If I can understand it, then I have a chance to control it. If I have a chance to control it, right? So I just heard that from a wonderful ag consultant, John Ellsworth, reminded us of that. So parting gifts. Thanks for coming and attending this. I'm going to look at questions. So right now, it looks like we have a question. Somebody wants to talk about emailing, and we'll get in touch with you. Thank you. When you get the recording, you'll get a copy of this recording with the slides. And then we'll also include the Human Beings Guide to Business Growth. It's a book that helps generate ideas, and it does that by by talking about one particular idea, which is turning your entire company into a walking, talking sales force. The Perfect Growth Formula, Bill Matern and I wrote this book, and this is more of an internal how to frame conversations so that you can get more out of your internal marketing and sales conversations. And Lead Gen Compass, which is going to be up live, leadgencompass.com, not too far from now, is our outsourced work. So everything that we've been describing, we only talk about things that we know, and inside of those things that we know, we've piled them all into that little arrow triangle, Lead Gen Compass, which is a service that you can use for yourselves. I'm looking for any other questions. There are no other ones. So let's talk about how to stay in touch with us, usfarmdata.com. If you're interested, visit leadgencompass.com. There's an email sign up. We'll give you a pre-access to the website so you can give us some feedback. And then you can learn a little bit about it too. Call at any time that phone number, or email us info@usfarmdata.com. That's 10 ways. This has been 10 ways to get more from less. I know there's at least one of the things in there that has been helpful to you. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, give me a call, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you.